And I would like to start by asking you, on the energy transition front, what is your company doing, or what are companies like OMV doing to be able to progress with their energy transition? A lot of these private companies are under pressure from their shareholders, you could say, to kind of move forward on that front. At the same time, you're having to deliver profits, hopefully every year, to those same shareholders. So how are you balancing those two objectives?
Well, first of all, I think we're also focusing on renewable energies as one major step, especially to reduce your CO2 emissions. But the other, we have been about a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago, we have been at a crossroad to decide which path we want to take, whether or not we would like to transform our oil and gas company into an energy company, so that we should invest more heavily into renewable energies. But when I was looking into all the projects, I found out that the rate of return I could get from these investments are far away from the rate of returns I was used to in my upstream investments. And I also asked myself, do I really have a competitive advantage so that I have a long-term view also to be very successful in energy, in power markets? So we decided against, because we have said, okay, if I look into my DNA as a company, especially integrated into the value chain towards refining into petrochemicals and chemicals, we have decided that OMV is now following a strategy that we would like to transform the company into petrochemicals, into the value chain of chemicals. And especially what we have seen in 2020 is that this business was pretty robust. Especially we have seen stronger demand in packaging and in healthcare, stabilizing the business. And we think that this has to be accompanied, especially when we talk about a sustainable transformation, it has to be accompanied by a heavy engagement into recycling. So OMV is preparing in the long term for a circular economy.
So just to ask you a bit on your sort of transition towards more petchems, as you're saying, that's become your focus rather than renewables. What's the timeline for that for OMV? Currently, you have a balance of oil and gas production. I believe gas is slightly more weighty than oil. But what's the timeline for converting that pipeline, if you like, or that value chain of oil into petchems, and where do you see that going?
Well, we have already started last year, and it was an anti-cyclical acquisition we did because we acquired the majority shareholding in Borealis, which is one of the leading companies in polyethylene and polypropylene, the biggest producer of ethylene and propylene in Europe, for example. And if you look now into our portfolio, OMV can demonstrate growth by 1/3 from one day to another with such an acquisition. So it brings growth, and it brings sustainable growth with the transition. And if you look now into our capital allocation, and you will see that already nearly half of our business is in chemicals, with such a big step with the acquisition of Borealis. Of course, it's going to be the first step.
Yeah, and yeah. So are you looking in terms of expansion into Asia, expanding into partnerships there? The Asian refineries themselves are restructuring and seeing this point of actually diversifying into petchems to survive and to expand. So geographically speaking, you're already in the Middle East in partnerships in refining. Are you going further east?
No, I think we are fully in love with Abu Dhabi. We have very strong partners, especially we enjoy very much our partnership with ADNOC, and we are operating the world's largest cracker together with ADNOC in Ruwais via our joint venture Borouge. And we are more thinking about an expansion of our joint venture Borouge with further investments into Abu Dhabi, because you have to ask again yourself if you would like to supply out of the Middle East into the Asian market, you need to have a competitive advantage. And I think sitting on a gas field and having just the ethene cracker sourced nearby, and you don't have these large logistical costs, is a competitive advantage. And we will build on our position we have together with ADNOC in the Middle East.
Okay, and what's your point of view of, I mean, this is obviously all going to require a lot of investment on your part, on other companies who are doing similar moves. In terms of the year 2020, clearly a big shocker to a lot of oil and gas companies and across other sectors as well. How has that impacted the thinking towards, forward energy investment, continuing with the commitment to invest, whether it's in petchems or other? How much of a challenge was that for OMV last year in terms of your planning?
I think it was a challenge for the entire industry because we have had to deal with less cash flows. The operating cash flow was heavily impacted. So the room to maneuver the company, especially everybody was cutting back investments. But if you look where we have cut our investments, it was mainly in upstream. It was a little bit in refining. So that's why I think you will see with the time lag that the industry really heavily cut back. On average, it was about, in our case, by 1/3. We cut back our investments. But the financial markets, and we have been very active in the bond market last year, was not really infected by the COVID pandemic. So you really could source cheap money out of the financial markets. And with that fresh money, we financed, for example, the acquisition of Borealis. So we invested heavily into the transition. And what I can see is that especially the green policies, especially of the European Commission, is incentivizing that you spend further money and invest additional money into renewable energy so that there will be a push. But the question mark is, of course, whether or not you have also an economic case for such investments. The industry can't survive if we build only on subsidies in the long term. So that's why I think, yes, the transition will take place. It is incentivized by big budgets from the European Commission, but you have to ask yourself, what is your sustainable business case on a standalone basis?
Okay, and just one more question to you, Dr. Heine, before we move on. Just in terms of the view ahead for 2021, as you said, companies like yours are making big decisions on investments. What is your point of view on where we're going with real demand returning to the market? It's not a question for you to answer. Nobody can tell us where we are with that. But how optimistic are you? I mean, obviously, Europe's going through a hard time now, back into lockdowns. The vaccines are there. They're being rolled out. What's your point of view of when you would see a real demand, realistic demand recovery for Europe kicking back in, putting aside the cold weather that you just mentioned at the beginning of our talk? Some pessimism emerging at the beginning of January on how quick the effect of these vaccines is going to have, or how much of an effect it's going to have on actual real demand, at least until July or August of this year.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm an optimist. I think if you don't want to visit a psychologist in these days, you have to be an optimist. And I think it's more fun to run a company if you have the optimism in your thinking. So I think that our industry, or let's say more or less all the industries, are going to face a difficult first half 21. I'm not too optimistic for the first half, but what we can see is that our industry, well, we had a good start into the year, into the first half of 21. If you complain about the prices, and you have mentioned it, I think that's not the right thing to do. And I think the second half is more the big hope. I think that oil demand will not recover to the 29 record level of 100 million barrels per day in 2021, but mid-22, I think that's a good outlook from my point of view. We will see some of the recovery also in the second half with the refining industry. At the moment, I would say I have more concern in refining than in upstream. We have very weak margins.
would you see that strength coming, that pull, obviously, on demand and refining coming really more from Asia, continuously relying on Asian demand really to pull all the.
I can't agree more, and it's all a story about jet, you know. And if vaccination really will kick in, and we will get more back to a normal life in second half this year, I think jet demand is also coming back. This is what I can smell from the airline industry. But we see already naphtha being priced under much better terms. So some products, refined products, already in the first half might give us a little bit of a backwind.
Thank you very much. So, as you said, jet fuel and the return of travel and mobility across regions is going to obviously pull the industry back into shape. Thank you very much, Dr. Rainer Seele, CEO.
Thank you.